Alright, yeah, welcome back to some more Magic Duels. This week we're going to be taking a look at a Selesnya Splashing Colourless Anointed Procession Infinite Combo deck. So essentially this makes infinite Scions, infinite life, infinite drain, infinite card draw, and infinite mill. There is all the infinites in this deck. So the way that this deck works, let's go into it. I should also note as well, in the comments section of the matches, you'll find yourself a survey. If you want to fill that out as well, it's got something interesting in there that you might be interested in. It'll only take 2 minutes to fill out as well, so if you could do that, then I'd be greatly appreciative of that. So, anyway, onto the deck. So, it is built around the brand new card from Armenket, Anointed Procession. Anointed Procession says 3 and a white enchantment. If an effect would create one or more tokens under your control, it creates twice as many of those tokens instead. And this actually stacks as well, so if you have both out, it doubles and doubles again. So, what we want to be doing is getting ourselves an Eyeless Watcher out onto the battlefield. So Eyeless Watcher creates 2 Scion tokens, and with an Anointed Procession it creates 4. So if we're generating 4 Scions per turn, and we get ourselves an Eldrazi Displacer that says 2 and a colourless, exile a creature and then return it to the battlefield tapped under its owner's control, we pay 3 to flicker the Eyeless Watcher, who makes 4 Scions. We take 3 of those 4 Scions, flicker the Eyeless Watcher again, leaving 1 behind. Eyeless Watcher makes 4, leaving 2 behind, and so on and so forth. We create infinite Scions that way. So that is infinite damage, but that does fold to a board wipe, so we usually want to have another card in play, something like a Pious Evangel, that says whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. So every single time we flick the Eyeless Watcher, we gain 4 life, essentially. Well, actually 5 with the flicker. And if we manage to flip it as well, when we sack the Scions to do this trigger as well, we drain our opponents. That's one way that we can win the game as well. Alternatively, we can create an infinitely big walking Ballista as well, attack our opponent with it, and then take all the counters off to kill our opponent that way as well. So we have a lot of ways to kill our opponent. So if we do look at Walking Ballista, it is X and X for a 0 artifact creature, enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. You can pay 4 to add a counter to it. Not very relevant in this deck because we will be putting a stupid amount of counters on it when it enters the battlefield instead. So we generate infinite Scions, we use all of them to make an 11/11 Walking Ballista or something like that, and then we take all of the counters with the final ability that says remove +1/+1 counters from Walking Ballista, deals 1 damage to target creature or player. So we make infinitely sized Walking Ballista and we ping our opponent with it essentially. Next we've got Elvish Visionary. We are a combo deck, so we need to find all of our pieces. So Elvish Visionary is a 1 and a green, 1/1 creature. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card. So we get to go deeper into our deck, trying to find all of our pieces. We do have ways of tutoring most of our cards. Anointed Procession is the hardest to find, but we do have cards to go and look for it. But Elvish Visionary allows us to go a little bit deeper into our deck to find our land drops and stuff like that as well. It's also an early game blocker for aggro decks because I found that without the Elvish Visionary we had nothing to block until about turn 4, which by that time if you're against an aggro deck you're probably dead. So Elvish Visionary is slightly more important than just simply drawing a card to make sure we hit our land drops and find our combo pieces. It's actually a blocker to save our life until we can get Pious Evangel onto the battlefield, that kind of thing. Next we've got Evolutionary Leaps, so for 1 and a green, an enchantment that says pay a green, sacrifice a creature, reveal the cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card. Put that card into your hand, the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So, if we, for example, have an Elvish Visionary, we can block and sack and we can go and find one of our combo pieces. So as I mentioned, there are 3 different creatures we want to be finding with Evolutionary Leap, and this helps us find them as well. Eldrazi Displacer is one of them. It's not the only way we can find it, but it is one of the best ways. Pious Evangel as well is also a good one. Or if we have our enchantment in the graveyard, we can get the Auramancer to grab it back. Or even the Eyeless Watcher to finish off the final piece if we need to maybe go wide to stop our opponent from killing us, or if that's all we need to finish our combo. So a single Evolutionary Leap allows us to find all of those pieces. There is only a single part of our combo that Evolutionary Leap cannot find, which is awesome. Only 1 copy though, because we don't want to go too enchantment heavy, and if you see more than 1 of them, you won't be too happy. Next we have Grapple with the Past. So for 1 and a green instant speed, put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard. Then you may return a creature or land from your graveyard to your hand. So if we're mana screwed on turn 3 or turn 2 when we play the Grapple, we can grab a land. Alternatively, if our opponent's destroyed one of our combo pieces, be it the Displacer, the Evangel, or the Eyeless Watcher, we can get it back with the Grapple with the Past. We can also, in a roundabout way as well, get back Anointed Procession as well if our opponent kills it. If we mill the Auramancer, or even the Green Warden, into our graveyard, we can get that back with Grapple, then play it and get our Procession back that way as well. So we do have some roundabout ways of getting Procession out of our graveyard and self-milling ourselves to find it a lot quicker. So that's why we've got that there. Eldrazi Displacer, we've gone over this. This is one of the major combo pieces. This is the way that we win the game, essentially, with this guy. So for 2 and a white, a 3/3 with Devoid, so it is colourless and not a white creature. Don't think that will be coming in won't be too relevant these days. It was more relevant back when the set was released, but right now it's not really relevant in the slightest. But it's a 3/3, and it is 3 mana, so it avoids Fatal Push as well. Should be noted that all of our combo creature pieces avoid Fatal Push. There is a token-based one of these in Armenket, which is a 2-drop, does not avoid Fatal Push, and it also doesn't instantly win us the game like the Wayward Disciple does, which is why we're running Pious Evangel over it. If I can find it really quickly, I will show you it. So sets, Armenket, I think it is a common. Apply. Anointed Priest, that's the one. It doesn't avoid Fatal Push, only triggers on tokens, whereas the Pious Evangel triggers on all creatures, including itself as well. And then this one has the added bonus of draining your opponent if you can flip it as well. Should be noted we can sack permanents, being lands, to trigger that, so we don't have to get rid of our Scions if that's entirely relevant. So yes, the Pious Evangel is a 3 mana 2/2 that gains life whenever creatures enter the battlefield. We'll be generating a lot of life off of that if we can get Eyeless Watchers into the field. So that would be a 4 mana that creates 3/3 power, essentially, and 3 life from the Evangel. Even more than that if we have a Procession out. And then the alternative side says that whenever a creature you control dies, target opponent loses a life and you gain a life. So whenever we sack a Scion, our opponent gets drained for 1. We still gain life the same way on the white side as we do on the black side. But our opponent loses life as well, so we can go infinite until they have no life left. So their life total actually doesn't matter to us in the slightest in this game. Next we have Auramancer. We've mentioned this before. We've got 1 copy of this just to get our Anointed Procession back. It's not entirely relevant all of the time. In fact, it barely happens, to be honest. But Auramancer is a 2 and a white for a 2/2. Enters the battlefield, you may return target enchantment card from your graveyard to your hand. So the targets for it are Evolutionary Leap if we need to find some of our creature pieces. Anointed Procession, of course, if we have had it destroyed, or we milled it with Grapple with the Past, that kind of thing. So we can get that back that way, so we can generate our tokens and finish our combo. We could even get a Cast Out if we've cycled it early in the game, or our opponent destroyed it. Cast Out's great for any kind of Planeswalker, or any permanent removal, to be honest, other than lands, of course. And even From Beyond as well, that can tutor up our Eldrazi side of our combo, which includes Eyeless Watcher and the Eldrazi Displacer. A lot of our deck can be tutored in several different ways. The only one that's difficult to find is the Anointed Procession, and as I said, we have some roundabout ways of grabbing that, but we also have a card later on that can actually just grab it if it appears anyway. Next we have a single copy of Reclamation Sage, so for 2 and a green, a 2/1 creature. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you may destroy target artifact or enchantment. So this is mainly there for tutelage decks, because we do self-mill ourselves a lot as well. They're for vehicles, and it can be flickered with Eldrazi Displacer, so having just 1 copy isn't too bad. It can also be tutored up with Eldritch Evolution as well, if we need to find it that way, and we can sack something even as low as an Elvish Visionary to get the Reclamation Sage onto the board, flicker it forever with the Displacer, and our opponent's no longer allowed to have artifacts or enchantments. It's kind of that fun. So we only need 1 copy because it is tutorable, and it's not always relevant in a matchup, so we're running 1 copy because we can find it. Next we've got Natural Connection. I found that we need quite a fair few lands before we can go off. We usually win on around turn 5, turn 6 if we get the absolute nut draw. So Natural Connection allows us to get to that mana quite soon as well. So for 2 and a green, instant speed, search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and shuffle your library. So we can get any basic from our deck as well. It takes us from 3 mana all the way up to 5 mana if we hit a lat drop the next turn. So we can make Planar Outburst if that needs to be the case, or we can just have a From Beyond, that kind of thing. We do have a single Wastes in here as well that we can find, because the Eldrazi Displacer does require colourless in order to use his ability. So if we are lacking the colourless source from our Ether Hubs or something like that, Natural Connection can actually go find us that land as well. So Eldritch Evolution, we've briefly touched upon this, but I will read it in full just for you. So for 1 and 2 green, sorcery speed, as an additional cost to cast Eldritch Evolution, sacrifice a creature. Search your library for a creature card with converted mana cost X or less, where X is 2 plus the sacrifice creature's converted mana cost. Put that card onto the battlefield, and then shuffle your library and exile Eldritch Evolution. So if we are missing one of our combo pieces, like our Displacer or our Eyeless Watcher, we can sacrifice any creature in our deck to go find it. So let's say an Elvish Visionary. The only exception is, of course, Walking Ballista, but we usually want to keep that in hand for when we go infinite, that kind of thing. But let's say we have an Elvish Visionary, but we don't have a Displacer. We sack Elvish Visionary to the Eldritch Evolution, and we can grab anything with converted mana cost 4 or less. So if we know our opponent's got a board wipe in hand, we could grab a Thought-Knot Seer. If we have Anointed Procession on the board and a Displacer in hand ready to go infinite, we can grab the Eyeless Watcher, generate 4 Scions, so that when we untap, we have lots of mana as well. We can even grab the Displacer, as I mentioned, or even the Pious Evangel as well, so we can start gaining infinite life if the board is in the right setup for us. So there is so much that this card can grab. It is essentially a tutor for everything. Next we've got Benefaction of Rona. So for 2 and a green, sorcery speed, reveal the top 5 cards of your library. You may put a creature card and or an enchantment from among them into your hand, put the rest into your graveyard. So this potentially grabs 2 cards. It grabs our Anointed Procession, which is the hardest thing to find in this entire deck. It's the only way to find it through a simple, regardless of drawing, of course. This is the only way to actually find it that way. So top 5 cards, if we hit a Procession, we take the Procession, and we can also take Eyeless Watchers and the rest of our combo pieces as well, so we can potentially get 2 things off of this. We also go 5 cards deep into our deck as well, which is no mean feat. Anything that we don't grab, that we self-mill, Grapple can get that back, Auramancer can get back extra enchantments, and Green Wadden can get back the rest as well. So it's pretty sweet. Benefaction hits a lot. We're running 4 copies because Anointed Procession is the hardest card to find, so we need as many copies of these as possible so that we find it as quick as possible. Because if we're playing this on turn 3, we want to be playing a Procession on turn 4. It's pretty much the case. Next we've got Eyeless Watcher. So for 3 and a green, we have a 1/1 creature with Devoid. Yet again, not particularly relevant. When Eyeless Watcher enters the battlefield, put 2 1/1 colourless Eldrazi Scion creature tokens onto the battlefield. They have Sacrifice this creature, add 1 colourless to your mana pool. So it creates 3 1/1s essentially, or it creates double the Scions with Anointed Procession on the board. So it generates 4 Scions, and we spend 3 with the Eldrazi Displacer to go infinite that way. So if our opponent doesn't have a board wipe, we win right on the spot with Watcher, Displacer, and Anointed Procession. If they do have a board wipe, then we need something like a Pious Evangel to gain infinite life, or a Thought-Knot Seer to mill our opponent to death, or a Walking Ballista to kill our opponent by removing the counters. Yeah, there's so many ways that we can win. We just need to find essentially those 3 pieces and any one of the ways that we win that way, if we are afraid that our opponent has a board wipe anyway. We can also go infinite in response to a board wipe, depending on the situation of our board state as well, so we could just win in response, which is quite nice. So Thought-Knot Seer, briefly brought this one up, but we'll go into it as well. So for 3 and a colourless, we have a 4/4 creature. When Thought-Knot Seer enters the battlefield, target opponent reveals his or her hand, you choose a non-land card from it and exile that card. So this is a combo deck, which means it is disruptable in the right situation. So if our opponent ends up having enchantment removal in their hand, Thought-Knot Seer can grab it. If they have a board wipe in their hand, Thought-Knot Seer can grab it. If this is the way that we want to win as well, we can flicker Thought-Knot Seer infinitely by flickering enough Eyeless Watchers to generate infinite mana, and then flicking the Thought-Knot Seer with the infinite mana to mill our opponent. It's not the most ideal play, and you will be there for a long time until your opponent concedes, but it is an option nonetheless. You don't have to continue all the way till they have 0 cards. Once they see the loop, they usually leave, so... But if they don't, I've noticed that the timer actually pauses when triggers are on the stack, so you will have all the time in the world as long as the game doesn't screw you over in a lagging situation anyway. So when it enters the battlefield, you take a card from your opponent. When it leaves the battlefield, your opponent draws a card. So when we flicker Thought-Knot Seer, our opponent draws a card, it comes back, we take that card. If we can't take that card, because we can't take lands, we flicker again, and our opponent draws a card, and we bring it back, we take the card out of their hand, and we can keep doing that infinitely until our opponent has no more cards in hand, or their hand is all lands. So we can actually, even if we don't want to kill them that turn, we can take all of the good cards out of their hand, so that their hand is like 7 lands, for example, and they've got nothing to do with their mana, which is also another way that you can win. So we've pretty much talked about Procession to death, so we'll move on from that. Cast Out is 3 and a white for an enchantment with Flash, which means we can cast it on our opponent's turn as an instant, essentially. When Cast Out enters the battlefield, exile target non-land permanent until an opponent controls until Cast Out leaves the battlefield. So this is our Planeswalker removal for Super Friends. It's also tutelage removal, big creature removal like Ulamog, that kind of thing. If our opponent puts any threat that we don't like onto the battlefield, then we get rid of it with Cast Out. If we don't feel like we need to use it as well, we can cycle it in the early game to discard a card and draw a card in its place for just 1 white mana. So if we are close to going infinite on that turn 5 or turn 6, but we need that final piece, then we might want to consider cycling Cast Out. Excuse me. If we also have an Auramancer in our hand, less bothered about cycling it because we can actually pull it back with the Auramancer later on as well. So, next we have From Beyond. So for 3 and a green, we have an enchantment with Devoid. Not relevant. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a 1/1 colourless Eldrazi Scion token onto the battlefield with the ability to sacrifice itself and gain 1 colourless mana to our mana pool. It also has a secondary ability as well, for 1 and a green, to sacrifice it, search your library for an Eldrazi card, reveal it and put it into your hand, and shuffle your library. So, every single turn with From Beyond we generate a Scion, which might be something we need against aggro to block their biggest creatures or just absorb some damage, but it also allows us to generate a lot of mana as well, so we can do a lot of things in a single turn. If we have Anointed Procession on the board as well, it generates 2 Scions per turn, and with a Pious Evangel on the battlefield as well, every Scion makes 1 life for us every single turn that way as well. As I mentioned as well, if we do sacrifice these creatures and we have a Wayward Disciple, which is Pious Evangel's other side, when we sacrifice that Scion, we drain our opponent. So, the 1 and a green to sacrifice this secondary ability is really good because it allows us to find our combo pieces. So we can find Eyeless Watcher with it, and we can find Eldrazi Displacer. So we can find the combo, we just can't find the finisher with it, unless we want to go down the Thought-Knot Seer path. So those are the options that we have available to us. It can find most of the cards in our deck that we need to find anyway. But until then, it generates a ton of Scions, a ton of mana, and a ton of value. Next we have Planar Outbursts. So this card's in here mostly because I found that if we don't generate our combo, our opponent usually has quite the board state that we don't have a way to deal with. So Planar Outburst is our way of resetting the board. Most of the time with this combo, you end up goldfishing your opponent, and that essentially means you play as though they weren't there for the most part. We just want to generate a combo, go infinite and win. That's pretty much the case. But Planar Outburst is here as a panic button so that we can reset the board and start from scratch. Maybe our opponent's played out their entire hand, we wipe the board, they've got nothing, and then we've got all the time in the world to build our combo. So for 3 and 2 white, destroy all non-land creatures. Every single creature that could deal us damage ends up dying, except for the ones that have got indestructible, essentially. It does also have the Awaken cost, though it's probably not going to be entirely relevant in this matchup, but it is useful from time to time. If your opponent's got a Planeswalker with 4 or less loyalty, you could probably kill one. So the Awaken is for 4, and you pay 5 and 2 white. If you cast this spell for that mana cost, you get to put 4+1/+1 counters on a land you control, and it becomes a 0/0 elemental creature with haste. Essentially, it becomes a 4/4 hasty land you can attack with after the board wipe. which allows you to take out planeswalkers, allows you to maybe deal that last little bit of damage that you might need to do. But most of all, it's just 5 mana to wipe the board clear so that we can continue doing what we're doing uninterrupted. Next we've got Green Wadden of Maratha, so for 4 and 2 green we have a 5/4 creature. When Green Wadden of Maratha enters the battlefield, you may return target card from your graveyard to your hand. When Green Wadden dies, you may exile it. If you do, you can do the same thing as if it entered the battlefield essentially. So Green Wadden grabs everything out of our graveyard. It grabs Ajani, grabs Planar Outbursts to wipe the board again, it grabs all of our enchantments like our Anointed Procession. So if we did mill with Grappled with the past and we hit an Anointed Procession that we can't grab with this card, Green Wadden can get it instead. So if we hit Green Wadden and Anointed Procession with the Grapple, we could get it back later on in the game that way, so it's pretty sweet. We can also flicker this with Eldrazi Displacer and get a card out of our graveyard every single turn, so it's kind of like a tutor card. If we've got everything we need in our graveyard, we want to be flickering Green Wadden every other turn as well, so that we can refill our hand with absolute gas. So we could maybe Ajani minus it dies, flicker Green Wadden, get back Ajani minus it dies, keep on doing that for as long as possible, which is pretty sweet. Speaking of Ajani, Ajani the Unyielding, so for 4 a green and a white we have a 4 loyalty planeswalker. You get to +2, reveal the top 3 cards of your library, put all non-land permanent cards revealed this way into your hand, the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. So this hits every single piece of our combo. It hits Anointed Procession, hits the Eyeless Watcher, it hits Benefaction of Rona so that we can tutor up all of our pieces, hits just Displacer, so on and so forth. It hits absolutely everything, and non-lands, should I say, all the lands go to the bottom, everything else we get to keep, so that's some serious card advantage. So for a +2 it's up to 3 cards, potentially none, but that's the risk that you have to take. Alternatively as well, you can ultimate Ajani quite easily. We're generating a lot of Scions, so it's a lot of blocking force to keep our opponent away from him, so you can ultimate quite quickly and quite easily as long as your opponent doesn't have dedicated planeswalker removal. We'll get onto that in a second though. He's -2, as I mentioned. You get to exile a creature, and its controller gains life equal to its power. As I mentioned, this is an infinite drain combo, or an infinite mill combo, or an infinite damage combo, so the life total really doesn't mean anything to us whatsoever. It just means that the combo is just going to take a little longer to kill our opponent. So if our opponent plays an Ulamog, we play an Ajani, we exile his Ulamog. He gains 10 life, but that doesn't matter because our Wayward Disciple is going to drain 3 on our infinite combo every single time we do it. So yeah, it's not going to take too long for us to win that way. Alternatively, we can just win with Ajani as well. If we've been generating a lot of Scions over the past few turns with our Eyeless Watchers and our From Beyonds and things like that, we -9 Ajani. We get to put 5 +1/+1 counters on every single creature we control, and 5 loyalty counters on each other planeswalker. We don't have any other planeswalkers, so the second part is irrelevant. But we've been generating a lot of Scions, let's say, all of this time. Like, Eyeless Watcher will be generating 3 by itself, so even if we just have an Eyeless Watcher on the field and we ultimate, we've got 3 6/6s, which is not too bad at all, and probably could just win us the game, if not slow our opponent down to the point where we get to go for our infinite combo again. That's essentially the deck though, guys. I do encourage you to watch the matchup so that you can see it in action, because it is quite a fun one to watch, and a little bit complicated from time to time. As I mentioned, there are a lot of roundabout ways to grab enchantments and creatures, so it's a very weird one to watch, but it's a lot of fun to play as well. I highly recommend you try it out if you get the chance. Anyway, let's go on to the land drops. We've got 6 plains and 6 forests. We do have quite the balance of both, to be honest. We have a lot of double whites, and we want to be hitting both green and white by turn 3. Double green on turn 3 is ideal. Double white on turn 5 is also ideal as well. So we've gone for a little balance here. We do have a lot of duels as well, which keeps that balance in check. We also have the waste, so that we can find that for the Eldrazi Displacer and the Thought-Knot Seer as well. Can be tutored up later on down the line. Canopy Vista is a forest and a plains. Enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands. We've got 13 in total, so there's a good chance this comes into play untapped, or on our first few turns we just play it as a tap land anyway, because we have no turn 1 play, so it's fine to do it then as well. We also have Westvale Abbey. As I mentioned, we are generating a lot of Scions, so we could probably actually use his ultimate, in a way, It is a colourless land, which is not too bad. We do need that for the Displacer and for the Thought-Knot Seer, as those two aren't very good without colourless sources. We can pay 5 and tap it to pay 1 life, put a 1/1 white and black human cleric token onto the battlefield. With Anointed Procession, that is 2 humans, so that is pretty good there as well. But what we really have him in here for is because we can actually trigger Westvale Abbey quite easily with the last ability. So pay 5, tap it, sacrifice 5 creatures, which might include Scions, transform Westvale Abbey, and then untap it. And we get to create Ormondal, the Profane Prince. This is a legendary 9/7 creature with flying, lifelink, indestructible, and haste. So the life gain alone is probably enough to swing the game back in your favour, depending on the board state. It is indestructible, so it survives a lot of removal as well. Exile is the best thing to do with Ormondal, or even if your opponent has a Displacer, they can flicker it back to a Westvale Abbey, which would suck. But most of the time, when you're flying over the top of your opponent with a 9/7 lifelinker, you're going to win pretty quickly, and most of the time we end up doing that anyway. If we do have our Pious Evangel flipped as well, when we sacrifice those 5 creatures, we're actually going to drain our opponent for 5, so that's also quite a relevant action as well. Moving on, we've got Sun Petal Grove. So Sun Petal Grove enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a forest or a plains. So we've got Canopy Vista that are forest and plains, but we also have a ton of basics as well. So yet again, Sun Petal Grove 9 times out of 10 will come into play untapped. We then have Ether Hub. Yet again, another colourless source for our Eldrazi Displacer, but also a coloured source for everything else. So when it enters the battlefield, you gain 1 energy. It taps for colourless, or you could pay the energy that the Ether Hub generates to add 1 mana of any colour to your mana pool. We don't generate energy, so if you are stuck on just Ether Hubs, you are in a bit of trouble. But there's not really any energy creatures that I could justify putting in here that really mattered, to be honest. So I ended up just sticking with Ether Hubs as they were. It's not actually a problem most of the time. There are just occasional RNGesus parts where you only draw Ether Hubs and therefore you have to spend some of your coloured mana here and there. But we do have a lot of basics, so the chances of that happening are extremely low. Finally, we have Evolving Wilds as well. We get to sacrifice Evolving Wilds, search your library for a basic land, and put it onto the battlefield tapped, and shuffle your library. We're running 3 copies of this so that we can find all of our basic colours, because as I mentioned, we want both double green and double white on about turn 3 or 4, just to make sure that all of our draws are nice and smooth and we have things to do. So the Evolving Wilds allows us to do that. Also thins out our deck so that Benefaction of Rona has a better chance of hitting Processions. You know, we can get back the Evolving Wilds with Grapple with the Past, stuff like that. There is a lot of synergies with cracking our Evolving Wilds that way as well. So that's going to be the deck anyway, guys. Do be sure to check out the matches that should be following shortly after this. Do apologise for the late upload of this video. I was supposed to get it out yesterday, but the servers have been a bit slow. It's creating a lot of really bad matchups and lag, so getting matches has been incredibly difficult for me, and getting good matches even worse. So I do apologise for that, but we are back on track now, going with our combo deck. So if you did enjoy the content, then be sure to leave a like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit that little bell icon right next to the subscription button to be notified when I release new videos. I do hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you check out the matches, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.